The storm that had been building behind closed doors finally erupted with devastating force, and no one in Genoa City was prepared for the fallout. At the center of it all stood Victor Newman, a man who had always prided himself on control, strategy, and unshakable authority, but even he couldn't have predicted just how violently the truth would unravel once Lily's secret came to light. Lily Winters had returned to town under the guise of tying up loose ends, presenting herself as calm, collected, and ready to move forward. But beneath that composed exterior was a truth so explosive that once exposed, it would send shockwaves through every corner of Victor's empire. What Victor initially believed was a mutually beneficial alliance quickly turned into something far more dangerous when whispers began to circulate, whispers that Lily had been playing a much deeper game, one that involved deception, manipulation, and a carefully crafted plan that even Victor hadn't fully uncovered. As Victor pieced together the fragments of information, his fury grew colder, more calculated. He summoned Lily to the ranch, his tone deceptively calm, but his eyes burning with suspicion. When she arrived, the tension between them was suffocating. Victor wasted no time, confronting her with evidence that suggested she had been working behind his back, possibly even orchestrating moves that undermined his authority. Lily, however, didn't crumble as expected. Instead, she stood her ground, her silence speaking volumes before she finally admitted just enough to confirm Victor's worst fears. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Lily had been hiding a critical truth, one that tied directly into Victor's recent schemes and threatened to dismantle everything he had built. Trust was shattered in an instant, replaced by a chilling realization: Victor had been outmaneuvered. But if Victor's confrontation with Lily was explosive, what followed with Nikki Newman was nothing short of catastrophic. Nikki, who had stood by Victor through countless battles, found herself caught in the crossfire of his rage. Already on edge from the mounting tension, she tried to reason with him, to remind him of their history and the strength of their bond. But Victor, blinded by betrayal and desperate to regain control, lashed out in a way that stunned even those closest to him. Accusing Nikki of being complicit, or at the very least, willfully ignorant, he crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. In a moment that would echo through Genoa City, Victor ordered Nikki out of the ranch, his voice cold and final. The dismissal wasn't just an argument, it was a declaration that even she was no longer beyond suspicion. Nikki was left reeling, her heartbreak evident as she struggled to comprehend how everything had spiraled so far out of control. The man she had loved, defended, and fought for had turned on her with ruthless precision. As she walked away from the ranch, it wasn't just her marriage that felt uncertain, it was her place in Victor's world. And for Victor, the decision, though seemingly resolute, carried a weight he refused to acknowledge. Deep down, the cracks were beginning to form, but his pride wouldn't allow him to see them. Meanwhile, across town, another disaster was unfolding, one that would bring Jack Abbott to his knees. Just when Jack believed he had regained some sense of stability, Patty Williams re-emerged, more unpredictable and dangerous than ever. Patty had always been a wild card, but this time, her actions carried a level of precision that suggested she had been planning her move for quite some time. She had information, damaging information, that could destroy Jack's reputation, his relationships, and everything he had fought to rebuild. Patty's return wasn't subtle. She inserted herself into Jack's life with unsettling ease, dropping hints and veiled threats that left him on edge. At first, Jack tried to dismiss her as a troubled woman seeking attention, but it quickly became clear that she was orchestrating something far more sinister. When Patty finally revealed her hand, the impact was devastating. She exposed secrets, carefully guarded truths that Jack had hoped would never see the light of day. Whether it was past mistakes, hidden alliances, or decisions that could be twisted into betrayal, Patty knew exactly which strings to pull to cause maximum damage. Jack's world began to crumble as the revelation spread. Allies questioned him, enemies seized the opportunity, and the stability he had worked so hard to achieve slipped through his fingers. The timing couldn't have been worse. With Victor already in turmoil and Nikki cast aside, Genoa City was primed for chaos, and Patty had ignited the match. As these three storylines collided, the city became a battlefield of shifting loyalties and broken trust. Lily, now fully exposed, found herself navigating the consequences of her actions. While some admired her cunning, others saw her as a traitor who had nearly brought down one of the most powerful men in the city. Victor, despite his anger, couldn't ignore the fact that Lily's moves had been strategic, perhaps even brilliant. The question now wasn't just whether he would punish her, but whether he might, in some twisted way, find a way to use her again. Nikki, on the other hand, faced a different kind of battle. Cast out and wounded, she had to decide whether to fight for her place beside Victor or finally walk away from a man who had pushed her too far. Her strength had always been her resilience, but this betrayal cut deeper than any before. Those closest to her urged her to reconsider her loyalty, to see Victor for who he truly was in that moment, a man willing to sacrifice even the people he loved in pursuit of control. And Jack, caught in Patty's web, was forced to confront his past in a way he never had before. The exposure of his secrets didn't just threaten his present, it forced him to reckon with the choices that had led him there. Patty's actions, while destructive, held a mirror up to Jack's life, revealing cracks he could no longer ignore. In the end, nothing in Genoa City remained untouched. Relationships were shattered, alliances were redefined, and the balance of power shifted in unpredictable ways. Victor stood at the center of it all, a man who had lost more than he realized, even as he tried to maintain his grip on control. Lily's secret had done more than expose a hidden truth. It had set off a chain reaction that changed everything. Nikki's exile marked the beginning of a painful reckoning, and Patty's attack ensured that Jack's life would never be the same. The question lingering in the aftermath was simple yet haunting. When the dust finally settled, who would still be standing, and at what cost? The aftermath of the chaos did not settle into silence. It twisted into something even more dangerous. A slow-burning tension that threatened to erupt again at any moment. A glass of bourbon untouched in his hand, replaying every moment of Lily's confession. What bothered him most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that he hadn't seen it coming. For a man like Victor, who prided himself on reading people like open books, that failure was unacceptable. And yet, beneath the anger, there was something else, an unsettling respect for how skillfully Lily Winters had executed her plan. But Victor was not a man who stayed wounded for long. If anything, betrayal sharpened his instincts. Within hours, he had already begun to shift from reaction to retaliation. Phone calls were made, quiet orders were issued, and pieces began moving across the chessboard once again. Lily may have outplayed him once, but Victor was determined that it would not happen again. He wanted leverage, something that would force Lily back under his control or crush her completely. And in Genoa City, leverage was never in short supply. It simply required knowing where to look. Meanwhile, Lily found herself navigating a very different kind of storm. The confidence she had displayed in front of Victor began to crack the moment she was alone. She had known the risks of her actions, but knowing them and living with the consequences were two entirely different things. Victor's reaction had been harsher than she anticipated, and the ripple effects were already spreading. Business associates began distancing themselves, whispers followed her into every room, and the sense of isolation grew heavier by the hour. Still, Lily refused to back down. She reminded herself why she had made those choices in the first place. This wasn't just about power or revenge. It was about securing a future where she was no longer at the mercy of men like Victor. Across town, Nikki Newman struggled to steady herself in the wake of Victor's devastating rejection. The pain of being thrown out of the ranch lingered like a bruise that refused to fade. She had taken refuge with a close friend, but even in the safety of those familiar walls, her thoughts remained trapped in the moment Victor had turned on her. Nikki had always understood Victor's darker side, had even defended it at times, but this felt different. This wasn't strategy or self-preservation, it was something colder, more ruthless. For the first time, Nikki began to question whether the man she loved still existed beneath the hardened exterior. Yet Nikki was not weak, and heartbreak had never been enough to keep her down for long. As the initial shock began to wear off, something stronger took its place: determination. She refused to be cast aside as collateral damage in Victor's war. If he believed she would quietly disappear, he was gravely mistaken. Nikki began reaching out, reconnecting with allies who had once stood firmly in her corner. She didn't know exactly what her next move would be yet, but she knew one thing for certain: she would not let Victor control the narrative of her life. At the same time, Jack Abbott found himself spiraling as Patty Williams tightened her grip on his world. Patty's revelations had already done significant damage, but she wasn't finished, not even close. Each new piece of information she leaked seemed calculated to hit Jack where it hurt the most. His credibility was eroding, his relationships were strained, and the sense of control he had fought so hard to regain was slipping through his fingers. Jack tried to confront Patty directly, hoping to reason with her or at least understand her endgame. But Patty thrived on chaos, and Jack's desperation only seemed to fuel her further. She spoke in riddles, her tone shifting between eerie calm and manic intensity, making it impossible to predict her next move. What made the situation even more dangerous was that Patty believed she was justified. In her mind, she wasn't destroying Jack's life, she was correcting it, exposing truths that needed to be revealed. As Jack scrambled to contain the damage, he realized he couldn't do it alone. He began reaching out to those he trusted, seeking advice and support, but even that proved complicated. The secrets Patty had exposed cast doubt on his integrity, making it difficult for others to fully stand behind him. The isolation Jack felt mirrored Lily's in an unsettling way, both of them caught in the fallout of truths that refused to stay buried. Back at the ranch, Victor's plans began to take shape in a more tangible way. He had uncovered something, an angle that could shift the balance of power back in his favor. It wasn't just about punishing Lily anymore, it was about sending a message to anyone who might consider crossing him. Victor arranged a meeting, one that would draw multiple players into the same room, forcing confrontations that could no longer be avoided. When the invitations went out, the tension in Genoa City escalated instantly. Lily knew this was coming, but she couldn't predict exactly what Victor had planned. Nikki, upon hearing about the gathering, saw it as an opportunity, a chance to face Victor on her own terms and reclaim her voice. And Jack, though hesitant, recognized that staying away might only make him look more vulnerable. The meeting itself was nothing short of explosive. Victor stood at the center, his presence commanding as ever, but there was a sharper edge to him now, a warning embedded in every word he spoke. He laid out his version of events, framing Lily's actions as a betrayal not just of him, but of the entire structure that held their world together. Lily fired back, refusing to be painted as the villain, exposing just enough of Victor's own manipulations to level the playing field. Nikki stepped in, her voice cutting through the chaos with a clarity that demanded attention. She didn't take sides, not fully, but she made it clear that Victor's actions had consequences, and she would no longer stand by silently while he destroyed the people around him. The tension between them was palpable, a mix of anger, hurt, and something deeper that neither of them could fully let go of. And then there was Jack, who found himself pulled into the conflict in ways he hadn't anticipated. Patty's shadow loomed over him, her influence evident in the way the conversation shifted toward his own secrets and vulnerabilities. Jack fought to maintain his composure, but the cracks were showing, and everyone in the room could see it. As the confrontation reached its peak, one thing became painfully clear: there were no winners here. Every person in that room had lost something: trust, stability, control, and the path forward was uncertain at best. Victor may have regained some semblance of authority, but it came at a cost that even he couldn't ignore. Lily had proven she was a force to be reckoned with, but her position remained precarious. Nikki had found her voice, but her relationship with Victor hung by a thread. And Jack was left to pick up the pieces of a life that Patty had shattered with ruthless precision. In the days that followed, the fallout continued to ripple outward. Alliances shifted, new rivalries formed, and the lines between friend and enemy blurred beyond recognition. Genoa City had always been a place of power struggles and hidden agendas, but this time felt different. This time, the damage ran deeper. And somewhere in the shadows, Patty watched it all unfold, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Because for her, the chaos wasn't a side effect, it was the goal. The days following that explosive confrontation did not bring relief. They brought a chilling clarity that the worst was far from over. In fact, what had happened in that room was only the beginning of a far more dangerous unraveling. Victor Newman returned to the ranch with a renewed sense of purpose, but it was no longer fueled purely by anger. It had evolved into something colder, more strategic, and far more dangerous. Victor had been humiliated, publicly challenged, emotionally shaken, and momentarily outmaneuvered, and for a man like him, that demanded not just recovery, but domination. He didn't want balance restored. He wanted control reestablished so completely that no one would ever dare cross him again. What Victor didn't say out loud, but fully intended, was that everyone involved would pay. Not just Lily Winters, not just Jack Abbott, and certainly not just Nikki Newman. This had become something bigger. A reckoning. And Victor had already begun laying the groundwork for it in ways none of them could yet see. Lily, meanwhile, was learning that surviving Victor's immediate wrath was only the first test. Enduring what came next would be far more difficult. Her business connections were beginning to collapse like dominoes. Deals she had carefully constructed were suddenly falling through without explanation. Investors who had once eagerly backed her were now hesitant, distant, or outright pulling out. At first, Lily tried to convince herself it was coincidence. But she knew better. This was Victor. This was how he operated quietly, methodically, dismantling everything she had built without ever needing to raise his voice again. Still, Lily refused to fold. If anything, the pressure hardened her resolve. She began reaching out to unlikely allies, people who had their own reasons to resent Victor or stand outside his sphere of influence. It was risky, dangerous, even, but Lily understood something that many others didn't. The only way to survive Victor Newman was to stop playing by his rules. And if she had to burn bridges, expose more truths, or even risk her own reputation further, so be it. She had come too far to back down now. Not far away, Nikki found herself standing at a crossroads she had avoided for years. The emotional weight of Victor's betrayal had settled into something heavier than anger. It had become clarity. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly see the pattern that had defined their relationship. The control, the manipulation, the endless cycle of loyalty demanded and rarely returned. Nikki Newman had always believed that love justified endurance, that their bond was strong enough to survive anything. But now she wasn't so sure. What made it even more complicated was that Victor wasn't reaching out. No apology. No attempt to repair what he had broken. Just silence. And that silence spoke volumes. Nikki realized that if she wanted closure, or perhaps even a new beginning, she would have to take action herself. But this time, it wouldn't be about returning to Victor. It would be about defining her life outside of him. That decision marked a turning point. Nikki began making moves, quiet at first, but deliberate. She reconnected with her own interests, her own ambitions, pieces of herself that had been overshadowed for too long. And while she didn't yet know where the path would lead, she knew one thing with certainty: she would never again allow herself to be dismissed as expendable. Meanwhile, Jack's situation was spiraling into something far more volatile than he had anticipated. Patty Williams had not only exposed his secrets, she had destabilized his entire sense of reality. Jack could no longer predict where the next attack would come from, or what form it would take. Every conversation felt loaded, every interaction laced with suspicion. The damage to his reputation was already significant, but the psychological toll was even worse. Jack knew he couldn't continue reacting. He had to go on the offensive. But confronting Patty head-on had already proven ineffective. She thrived on confrontation, on chaos, on the emotional turmoil she created. So Jack began to think differently. Instead of trying to stop Patty, he started trying to understand her. What did she really want? What was driving her this time? Because beneath the erratic behavior, there had to be a pattern, something he could use to anticipate her next move. As Jack dug deeper, what he uncovered unsettled him even more. Patty wasn't acting alone, not entirely. There were influences, connections, subtle signs that someone or something had been pushing her, guiding her, perhaps even manipulating her instability for a larger purpose. And that realization shifted everything. Because if Patty was just a piece of a bigger game, then the stakes were even higher than Jack had feared. Back at the ranch, Victor received information that made him pause for the first time since everything had begun. It was a small detail at first, something easily overlooked, but Victor had built his empire on recognizing the significance.